Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is February 28, 2022. This is a brief video on the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict in which I'm going to summarize some of the comments that I've posted on Twitter and in the YouTube community posts just in video form for people who haven't been reading those, because a lot of people are wondering what is going on in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and I have basically three main points or three sets of comments that I'd like to make. So I'm going to do that in this video. I'll be back tomorrow, Tuesday at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern for the regularly scheduled stream at that point. I may also have another video tomorrow. But in any event, I wanted to get this up now. Overall, I have not been really happy at all with the kind of anti-war messaging that I've been seeing on social media from almost anyone. There are definitely some exceptions, but I feel like it's a fairly small minority, and I would count myself in that fairly small minority. I'm not going to be correct 100% of the time, but I do consider myself a sincere and committed Marxist. I don't know that that's really the case across the, quote, left alternative media. But anyway, these are the results of my analysis from what I would consider a Marxist perspective. So first, moving into the facts a little bit, this is the only news story I'm going to be putting up here. Right now, the UN Security Council is holding a meeting to discuss the situation in Ukraine. It says here, Ukrainian officials announced Monday that dozens of civilians were killed and hundreds more wounded when Russian forces began firing at civilian areas in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city. Ola Senehubov, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, head of the Kharkiv Regional State Administration, called the attacks a war crime, saying, quote, "The Russian enemy is shelling entire residential areas of Kharkiv, where there is no critical infrastructure, where there are no positions of the armed forces of Ukraine that the Russians could aim at," unquote. Delegations from Ukraine and Russia met in Belarus on Monday morning in an attempt to negotiate a ceasefire as Russia's stock exchange remains closed and the ruble plummets. That's the end of the story. So 2 points there. The first one about the Russian economy, terrible. A lot of people, working people in Russia, don't really have much savings. This is going to impact people with very little money quite badly. And the second point about the allegations of war crimes and Russian troops shelling residential areas, we don't know yet. I don't know if this has been confirmed. It's, hard to get accurate information. As they say, the truth is the first casualty of war. We don't really know, and honestly, there's just no real way to know. So we have to take that as it comes. Eventually, better evidence will come out and we'll know what happened one way or another, but, while an active conflict is going on in the first few days, it's very hard to get real information. All right, so on to my comments. The first comment is basically last night, abolish NATO was trending as a hashtag. A lot of people were tweeting abolish NATO, either just the words or as a combined hashtag. And yes, NATO is obviously the world's leading imperialists. If you're against imperialism, NATO is not your thing. As I wrote, abolish NATO, why? It's an alliance of the powers most responsible for exploitation and class oppression, and they're allied in the interest of continuing more exploitation and class oppression. NATO and non-NATO capitalist powers alike must be confronted by the international working class, their rule broken and their systems smashed. There is no way around it. The international bourgeoisie who formed NATO to protect their international capitalist and imperialist interests must be confronted and removed from power. But, and this is I think really key, disbanding or abolishing NATO most likely is impossible without much broader socialist struggle. And I don't know if people are really ready to embrace that struggle. So what do you do in the absence of that broader socialist struggle? You start picking sides and cheering on capitalists. This is a major mistake. So continuing with my comments, Russia, now fully embracing capitalist and we can say imperialist logic, because these are just different points in time of capitalism. To demonstrate this, let's take Lenin's very famous book title, Imperialism, the blank stage of capitalism. The missing word is highest, meaning this is where capitalism goes. It's what it evolves into. As capitalists grow, they need to expand beyond their borders. This creates conflict between capitalists, and you get major inter-imperialist wars and so forth. Now, there are stages of capitalism prior to that. There are stages of capitalism as it is just becoming imperialism. But anyway, continuing with the comment, as Russia has now fully embraced capitalism 30 years after the overthrow of the Soviet Union, it's also, like the NATO countries, headed down the path of imperialism. Just because they're smaller today doesn't mean that they aren't headed to the same destination. As Marxists, we know where capitalism leads. I feel like this really bears repeating because there's a lot of non-Marxists who are using the term imperialism, and then a lot of semi-Marxists who have been taught the Marxist definition of imperialism, and there's a lot of bastardization of this going on out there. So speaking of bastardization, this actually takes me to point 2, which is about the current state of quote-unquote anti-war messaging in the U.S. quote-unquote left. That's not to try to demoralize people who are actually left, but there's a lot of distortion and watering down of anything remotely socialist or pro-worker for the kind of contrarian populism that we keep seeing, that keeps being an issue. So my comment was the current state of anti-war messaging of the U.S. left, and if you'll recall my earlier comments, I think that this is wholly unsatisfactory, is a consequence of having allowed Ron Paul-type libertarianism to become influential, sort of paleocon. Some people call it isolationist. Why can't we just trade with the world? Yeah, because capitalism doesn't work like that is why. But this was allowed to become influential in the 2000s and going into the 2010s when the Tea Party became big. And the left, having been really small, was not capable or not willing or whatever it was of thoroughly beating that back and rejecting it as the crypto-fascist trash that it is. No matter how you dress this up, it isn't Marxist. I mean, honestly, libertarianism is far-right, explicitly anti-Marxist. So if you're glossing over, downplaying, or otherwise not taking seriously, let alone taking cues from right-wing extremism, then you're pretty hopelessly lost. Possibly you were led astray by the billions of dollars worth of class collaborationist manipulations on social media, in the corporate media, all over the place, even, yes, also in the alternative media. So start over. If you wound up at that point, you need to start over. You need to be honest with yourself that this is a bunch of crap and you've been led down the path by right-wing extremists. You need to not do that. These are committed anti-socialist, anti-Marxist, anti-communist, no matter what you are, if you're even vaguely left, they're against it. People. This is like the brief minute-and-a-half clip of Donald Trump declaring war on, quote, communists, Marxists, globalists, etc., that I put up on the channel last night, and a lot of people are like, they don't even know what that means. You're missing the fucking point. It's never right-wing enough for them. They will call anything left-wing because they just want to keep stamping out its reaction, 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 reaction. It's never right-wing enough for them, and they will attack anything. So don't take it as a joke, take it as a threat that things that you consider right-wing, they consider left-wing, and they're going to attack them all. They're going to attack us, and they're going to attack even people to our right and all kinds of things. So again, I think a lot of people really missing the point. But, the time has passed for any kind of a blasé, casual attitude towards this. It's really time to get serious. I know that, that disengagement is kind of a defense mechanism psychologically, but you gotta ditch it now. You gotta get back in the game. So anyway, continuing the comment, to be sure, Ron Paul libertarianism is right-wing extremism. It's anti-Marxist, hyper-capitalist, and it comes with a heaping helping of your standard basket of far-right bigoted views, whether it's white nationalism, all these things are just a stone's throw away from libertarianism. That libertarian to fascist pipeline, very real thing. One day you're watching libertarian videos, the next you're watching Lauren Southern talk about how cool South Africa was, and there you go, you're on your way. And so the libertarian anti-war cry is usually something like, but we don't want imperialist capitalism. We just want pure trade between people. As libertarians say, the non-aggression principle, the NAP, no force or fraud. Well, this is pure idealism, and it's unacceptable to dialectical materialists. If you think that, for example, left-wing anarchists like anarcho-communists are idealists because they think that you can build socialism without a state, well, first of all, you're correct. You can't build socialism without a state. The state is a product of class society. Every ruling class sets up a state to maintain and expand its class rule. So capitalism without a state is impossible, just like socialism without a state. You have absolutely no way to administrate and defend what you're trying to build, particularly when capitalism and imperialism still exist. But as far as this libertarian notion of, oh, we can have capitalism without war, this is just denialism. At best, it's extreme idealism, which tries to say that wars and things like that under capitalism are caused by just personalities or cronies or conspiracies, but, it's basically not inherent to the system. That's what they say. As Marxists, we know that this is complete crap. As materialists, we know that there are material causes for war under capitalism, and we need to reject that kind of absolutely nonsensical anti-Marxist analysis. Because, like I said, at best, it's idealist and naive, but really, I mentioned the libertarian to fascist pipeline. More often, it serves as a cover for the reality. They suck people in with that, then somebody tells them the truth that, like, oh yeah, we kind of just say that, but in reality, we're, gearing towards like an ethno-state or whatever. And, at a deeper level, they acknowledge all of the oppression and violence that capitalism requires. But they sell people up front on this, ideal of like, yeah, we'll just trade freely with people. It's complete denial of historical reality. So anyway, those of us who have been active in the anti-war movement since, for example, like the last 20 years, the current era, the war on terror, the post 9/11 2001 era, when Bush and Cheney launched the framework for a meta-war, a whole series of wars against, quote, terrorists. Well, this is what we've been living in for 20 years. Prior to this, there were U.S. interventions, but this really took it to a new level. Basically, the Bush-Cheney doctrine was like, if we say there are terrorists in your country, then we have every right to invade it and just cause whatever destruction we want. This was a new step, and arguably, occurring as it did just 10 years after the destruction of the Soviet Union and all the fallout from that. Well, it's because they were like, oh, it's a unipolar world, we can do whatever we want. Well, anyway, since that time, with the current time period that we're living in, perhaps it's coming to a close, perhaps it isn't, people in the anti-war movement who are more on the left have had to deal with these obnoxious libertarians. They have this nationalistic, proto-fascist, quote, capitalist anti-imperialism. They've been saying this shit for 20 years or longer, and now the growing Marxist, actually socialist left needs to shut it down. The problem is they've sown so many seeds, and what we see is, when war breaks out, there's a major conflict here between, Russia and NATO, with sort of Ukraine in the middle. Like I said, I don't think that most of the messaging is going over very well, and I think that I see a lot of poisoning and corruption of what could be better messaging with this kind of, Tulsi Gabbard, libertarian, nationalistic, quote, anti-imperialism. And you can see how deep it runs, because it'll be like, I'm an anti-imperialist, I'm anti-war. Hold on a minute while I go invade Africa. So, there's Tulsi Gabbard for just one example. But this is a lineage. You can't just look at what's happening today. You got to look back at least a few decades. So anyway, On to the third point. One of the things that I have seen as far as, people trying to become geopolitical experts without any kind of actual Marxist analysis is people hyping up the Mearsheimer video about the Russia-Ukraine conflict from a few years ago. I'll put a link to that if you want. I mean, probably everybody has been treated to a link to that, from somebody or another by now at this point. But the video about the Russia-Ukraine conflict, a lot of people are bringing this up in support of, as a piece of evidence in support of Russia's innocence, quote unquote. But actually the video explicitly states, and this is a quote, "In fact, if you really want to wreck Russia, what you should do is to encourage it to try and conquer Ukraine. Putin, again, is much too smart for that." Yeah, well, apparently he isn't, because that's what NATO did, and Putin did it. So every year, NATO would do this. Every year, the U.S. would issue statements like Russian troop buildup along the border, they're going to invade Ukraine, they're going to invade Ukraine, they're going to invade Ukraine, and Russia didn't. And all the videos up till about a week ago all say the same thing, that U.S., shut up. I mean, I've said this myself. U.S., you're making asses of yourselves trying to hype up war. Russia's going to invade Ukraine. And year after year, they have not. And then this year they did. Now, the interesting thing is that almost every analyst out there, with very few exceptions, I'm one of them. And I would say that the difference is probably that I'm coming from more of a socialist Marxist place that uses more class analysis. And ultimately these conclusions may end up being shown to be incorrect. Of course, I'm going to acknowledge that possibility. I don't think that they are, but of course it's possible. However, it's strongly the direction that I'm leaning in, and something that deeply concerns me is, much like Marxism itself, it's nearly impossible to get people to even consider these possibilities. I have brought them up dozens of times, and I've really only had one or two people say, "Oh, okay, I see that now." Nobody else even wants to look at it. That to me feels like an all too familiar pattern. So again, I have not really been dissuaded from this whatsoever, because usually when people try to argue against it, they don't really embrace the point in the first place. So they're just sort of bringing up side points. And I'm like, but you're not really responding to what I'm saying. I mean, on one level, I get it. These are disturbing times, and, I can understand not wanting to think about it. But, if you're going to weigh in with opinions, you kind of have to consider it. Anyway, what I was trying to say in the first place is all these people going back years who were like, oh, NATO's just rattling, jerking Russia's chain, rattling their cage, whatever. And Russia's, too smart to fall for that shit, right? Well, now that Russia did fall for it, all of them are just justifying it. Well, wait a minute. As my comments said, if not attacking was the smart move up until 2 fucking weeks ago, I've seen, again, many videos basically stating on February 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, that Putin wouldn't do something that stupid. Then 2 weeks later, he fucking does it. And they're all like, oh yeah, well, he has a real point. No. Then you just have to accept that if it wasn't smart 2 weeks ago, it also wasn't smart 2 weeks later. So again, that's sort of a lack of consistency with a lot of the analysis here that really gives me pause. And I don't think we're in particularly good hands here as far as the overall narrative, because all the people who were, championing Russia's wily wits in the face of NATO provocations now are coming up, just falling all over themselves, trying to come up with excuses for Russia falling for the provocations. Well, as I said in an earlier comment, the very essence of a provocation is attempting to get your adversary to do something self-destructive. Well, if we're saying that NATO's been provoking them, yeah, that's the last thing you want to do is go for it. So anyway, continuing with the comment, sometimes then, continuing on the Mearsheimer thing, people will come back with, yeah, but, okay, fine. Mearsheimer also said that if you back Russia into a corner, quote unquote, and I don't entirely accept that framing, but let's just go with it for a minute. Well, then if you back them into a corner, what else can they do? They're likely to attack. To which I say, okay, but have you considered that if you know that, NATO also knew that? And that might have been exactly what they wanted and needed out of Russia. So again, if we can acknowledge that NATO, in fact, may have been egging on Russia to do exactly what it did, that this may help NATO, rather than all the kind of crazy, when I said people falling all over themselves to justify or find some silver lining in this. I had somebody try to tell me that Russia is trying to bring stability to Europe. I'm sorry, you're high on your own fart. That's what's going on. There is really nothing about the overall context or history about the situation that would support that kind of statement. It's grasping at straws. It's trying to make lemonade out of lemons when you won't even be honest with yourself that lemons and not whatever tastier fruit you were trying to get is not what you wanted. So as far as the overall tenor of this whole thing, can you really trust people who are wantonly just refusing to be honest with themselves about basic points of the situation? I cannot. So I don't really trust anything else that they say. And it's not just a matter of trust. I mean, you can go through and evaluate each point individually after that. But that's a real bad start. Again, I see this kind of spinning in circles as a symptom of the international proletariat is not a player here. So people are just picking a side in this intercapitalist conflict. It's exactly what you don't want to do. Because if you're saying NATO needs to be opposed because they're imperialist, then you start doing the mental gymnastics of Russia is somehow anti-imperialist. Now, that's, that doesn't dignify a response, but I mean, it's my job, I guess, to respond. That's nonsense. Capitalist powers fight wars over profits. Whatever you think the situation is today, this kind of blind cheering on of Russia with the added mental gymnastics of like there's some freedom fighting force. Where does this end up in another 5 or 10 years? Because we're still going to be alive then, okay? The world is still going to keep on ticking. If you're trying to do this kind of analysis, you can't just look at 5 minutes in front of you. You got to look down the line, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Where does this go? So where Russia's headed is, just like NATO is at already, no matter what Russia's strength or size is today, is they're just barely recovering now from their 30-year crash following the destruction of the USSR. So they're just getting some strength, and what are they doing with it? It's heading towards war. But that's what capitalism does. Again, this is more this like libertarian, nationalistic, fascistic idealism. Thinking that some bourgeois, anti-proletarian power is somehow going to be some like freedom fighting force. It's insane. And I've heard every variation of this, and none of them work. This is a problem of capitalism. And, it's just amazing, depressing, infuriating, however you want to react to it, however it hits you. This is not a good situation. And, I think there's a lot of Red-Brown Alliance Kool-Aid that is being drunk out there to try to, attain the state of consciousness, delusion, where this somehow looks good for anybody but the absolute worst people in the world. Speaking of, let's talk about NATO. For their part, what else would you expect from NATO but lies and manipulations? So that's obviously what they're doing. Obviously. No serious anti-imperialist would ever expect NATO to do anything other than to lie, exploit, and manipulate. That's what this is all about. But the point is, being anti-imperialist and resisting NATO means, and you can call this unfair or whatever, but it's what it means, and you just have to deal with it. It means being better than NATO and not falling face first into their traps and provocations. The reality of the current fight is that NATO, the USA, the IMF, etc., on that side, being imperialist, is unlikely to leave Ukraine alone or to respect their sovereignty. That's not really their deal. They want and need to subjugate it and plunder it for profit as they need to do with every country. I mean, we've seen this time and time again. On the other side, Russia is currently a smaller capitalist rival of NATO, and it butts heads with them as it pursues its own selfish capitalist ambitions. Because, again, capitalism just has an internal logic to it. This isn't some, intrinsic sin to Russia. It's fucking capitalism. But it also does not allow Russia to leave Ukraine alone or respect Ukrainian sovereignty, etc. These are both problems. So the bottom line for working people is we need a stronger socialist movement so that workers, as an organized force, can be a factor in geopolitics, not just pawns cheering on organized capitalist factions. And I've said this in the stream on Saturday. I'll say it again now. The Bolshevik Revolution and the ensuing waves of socialist revolution following it, following that excellent example, the emergence of Marxism-Leninism into the world, this bought many decades of peace, but the effect largely has worn off. And we're back to a place where we need to do it again, and if we don't, we're fucked. You have to get that through your head. There is just no alternative here. Lenin said that doing this kind of organizing is one of the most difficult things, but it is the only task worthy of the proletariat. It is, in fact, the only socialist task. You cannot just sit back, eat snack chips, and root on some capitalist force, even if it's smaller than the US, and think that this constitutes your revolutionary duty. So there's absolutely no excuse for not doing this in terms of class composition in 2022. Russia was able to do it 100 years ago. Proletarianization is about as complete as it can possibly get under capitalism. You could possibly ruin a little bit more. I mean, capitalism could ruin a little bit more of the petty bourgeoisie and make them into proles while, a tiny select few become billionaires. But yeah, we're there. There's not a big peasantry anymore. There's not all kinds of middle artisan classes and things. The proletariat is here. It is massive. It is the overwhelming majority of the population of the advanced nations. We don't have to wait around anymore. We don't have to do popular fronts with, different petty bourgeois factions. We don't need to. The proletariat is already large enough to do everything that is needed from a socialist perspective. The thing that is really lacking is the actual organization. Now, you can say that there's also education lacking. I would agree. It's why I do this fucking channel. The basic formula is agitate, draw out concerns. Many people are already there. We can keep agitating among, people who haven't, they're still in denial about how bad things are. Then you educate. You show how the problems that you have, drawn out people's complaints. You then take the complaints and say, well, this is the result of capitalism, and here's how socialism is the solution. That's education. And then finally, you organize. You join IRL organizations, and you fight capitalists, locally, regionally, nationally, internationally. Capital is more global than ever. I mean, who's buying up land in the United States, residential properties and things at this point? We're dealing with a global system. We need global organization, but you can at least get started with something local in your city, your county, your state, wherever you are. The proletariat is disorganized. It's also corrupt to some extent. It's been bought off and has bourgeois thinking. It's adopted bourgeois ideology. It has a false consciousness about what its material interests are. We can fight against that. And the proletariat is also terrorized and terrified. I mean, the United States police force, if taken as a military, would be the third largest military by budget in the world. So that's significant. I'm not saying that, there's no obstacle here. There are giant lethal obstacles, and I sympathize with everyone who has been terrorized in one way or another by the prison industrial complex / police state. These are absolutely formidable challenges, and they're not easy. But as Lenin said, doing this work is the only socialist task. It's the only task worthy of the class-conscious proletariat. Literally doing anything else is not worthy of your time. So I'm going to leave it there for now. We've been going for a half an hour. I will be back with more videos. So just off the top of my head, like I said, there will be the Tuesday stream tomorrow, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern at Twitch. There's a link to that right in the video description of basically every video. The link is twitch.tv/socialismS4A. I most likely also will be uploading a continuation of my responses to the comments from the chat from the stream on Saturday. So a few days ago, I'll probably be uploading that. I may not get to it, but I probably will. Also, as far as current events, I've been talking for a while about a major financial catastrophe, like on the level of 2008, maybe more, like cataclysm type of level. Well, it looks like that may start happening this year. All the more reason why, the gears of World War III lining up, where you have large capitalist nations like Russia, squaring off in these kinds of, well, what's going on in Ukraine is much more than a skirmish at this point. What you don't want to do is also throw in economic collapse there. As I mentioned, the Russian currency is collapsing right now. People can think, oh, yay, Russia, and maybe the people will get upset and overthrow Putin or whatever. But that can also have really wide-ranging consequences which are not easily predicted, and who the fuck knows? This could also be a reason, as I mentioned in the last stream, and I've seen other people talking about online, why the U.S. has been pivoting away from doing really anything about COVID, this week adopting new standards to basically totally ignore COVID and go fully mask off as far as N95s or something. So that will be the second thing I'll be uploading, is an update on the CDC's absolute betrayal of the American people. There's no COVID protections at all, virtually. We just took another huge step towards pretending that the pandemic is completely over. Rochelle Walensky, totally unfit to hold office. Have a story on that. And then also a recap of more Ukraine things. Possibly there will be current events, but basically I'm looking to do a video that is one part commentary and elaboration on the Lenin audiobook that I uploaded a couple days ago, The Defeat of One's Own Government in the Imperialist Wars. That basically spells out the revolutionary defeatism principles. I've gotten some really wacky interpretations of this one, and I want to sort of lay that out. I think a part two of that is looking at what is Putin actually doing. Are these, anti-imperialist freedom-fighting things? Well, what's he saying in his speeches himself? I don't think that that's supported at all by what Putin is saying. And then lastly, what is the Communist Party of the Russian Federation saying? Are they taking a proletarian stand, or are they just tailing Putin and acting as controlled opposition, as many people have accused them of doing? Lastly, and I guess I can just address this now, I saw somebody on Twitter insisting that the Communist Party of Ukraine was in favor of the Russian invasion of their country. Yeah, no source was posted, none was provided when I asked, and I went to the Communist Party of Ukraine's website. There was absolutely nothing to that effect in their newsfeed, and there weren't that many items in their newsfeed. So is it possible I missed it? And is it possible this person just didn't feel like providing a source, but there actually is one? I guess, but yeah, I don't think it's likely. So remember, truth is the first casualty of war. War is not your friend. It's a situation which can sometimes be used to the advantage of a well-organized revolutionary movement of the working class. We're currently lacking that. So I don't know how anyone can be cheering on this situation as a positive when we, the working class, are not even organized as a force to take advantage of the situation. There's not even that actual silver lining. There's a lot of madness going on. And if the war keeps spreading, this is just a taste of the kind of madness and insane discourse and dishonest discourse that is to come. I was old enough in the post 9/11 era to remember very well how the entire national dialogue changed, and it never really changed back. But the sort of blatant hysteria, the terror that just gripped the country, is like no one could think straight anymore. You don't want that. It isn't good. You've got to get organized first. That's the idea. And I really hope it isn't too late in this case. We've got to keep doing whatever we can with the time that we have. And actually, before I close, I'd like to mention DSA, of all places, I guess, but the largest kind of, broad left group in the United States put out a very good statement calling for de-escalation, ceasefire, peace talks immediately as step one, and also started the conversation about what to do in terms of disbanding, abolishing, and otherwise addressing the standing problem of NATO. So with that, I'm going to open it up for comments. Write your sincere and hopefully politely worded questions and comments in the discussion space below. We'll continue it there. I will say, as I roll into the third year of doing this channel, now a few weeks into the third year, I'm incredibly sick of arguing with people in internet comments. At the same time, I don't like to let comment sections just, rage on. I already block people a lot on social media, and probably I'm so sick and tired of just getting into fights with people and making enemies with people. I'm going to be doing a lot more blocking in lieu of replying. There is just a lot of serious work that needs to be done, and I'm sick and tired of just reading fucking straight up garbage, whether they're in the YouTube comments here or just anywhere. Amplify the voices that are actually productive and constructive, and as far as the rest, I'm just sick of hearing it. Like it or not, this is a pretty decisive moment in terms of, litmus tests, who's on what side, who's putting out somewhat vital messaging, and, again, if you get the block, there are far worse fates. You can still watch the videos, but I got to do what I'm doing here, and honestly, just reading a ton of argumentative crap is not really helping that process for me. So yeah, third year, less arguing, more just sort of focusing on what needs to be done. And, that frees up space to actually work with the people who are trying to participate in a positive way. Anyway, that said, thanks for listening, and thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen with a Patreon contribution, head to patreon.com/socialism for all. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month. I really appreciate the support. It has helped me out a lot. I would not have been doing as much content as I have been doing without it. So really thank you deeply to the patrons who are enabling more content for everyone to make use of. Otherwise, liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting all helps to boost this channel in the YouTube algorithm, helps more people to see the content, helps to expand the conversation. Back in reality, join an organization. That's where all of this, the rubber actually meets the road. No, I do not endorse organizations. Get out there, try to find something larger rather than smaller, preferably something with healthy dynamics. People get along, they don't get super burned out and bitter, and something with real ties to the community, doing actual work that benefits the community, the kind of thing you'd like to contribute to. Those would be some of my guidelines. Don't shy away from joining something that is larger, more mass-oriented, like a DSA or Greens, if it's the only thing in your area, which sometimes it is. If you can't get in there and advocate for Marxist positions, where can you really? So, again, get involved. You're going to meet other people. Even if it is a larger organization, you'll meet some other Marxists, and maybe you start a spin-off project 6 months from now. Whatever it is, get out there, meet people, do the work. That's where all this comes to life. Anyway, thanks again, and we'll catch you in the next video.